A business operating at a steady profit can give its workers...
Here, in fact, is the answer to a dream as old as man himself.
Hurry, step right up, folks. Here's the answer to your problems, Dr. Utopia's...
Sophocles' Oedipus Rex tells the story of King Laius of Thebes, who unwittingly fulfills a prophecy by dying by the hand of his son Oedipus. As a baby, Oedipus was abandoned by Laius and his wife Jocasta in fear of fulfilling an ancient prophecy, only for Oedipus to return as a fully grown man, killing Laius and marrying Jocasta, unaware that the prophecy Laius set to avoid has been set in motion. As Jocasta realizes that she married her own son, she hangs herself, as the story ends with Oedipus stabbing his own eyes out with his mom's pins, rendering him blind while demanding his exile. Wrong Organ's Mouthwashing is a psychological horror game released on the 26th of September 2024, and it revolves around the crew of the Tulpar, a ship owned by the Pony Express, often referred to as Amazon in space, as it faces the results before and after crashing on an asteroid. The game switches between the perspectives of Captain Curly and the co-captain Jimmy while their crew slowly falls apart, especially while Jimmy descends into madness and Curly is rendered an immobile and burnt husk. Now, one may wonder, how did we get here? Who crashed the ship? And how is Jimmy a pivotal figure in this story? All will be answered in this essay, which will cover how Mouthwashing is considered a modern retelling of the classical tragedy. So, to get started, let's dive into what makes a tragedy. A tragedy, by definition, is a string of events that ultimately results in the downfall of a character, but there is more nuance to it, as tragedy serves as a human response when it faces themes of destiny or injustice. Tragedy is a really old genre, stemming as far back as ancient Greece, with the great philosopher Aristotle noting the story of Oedipus Rex as a blueprint for what would make a tragedy. As time persisted, Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy sprouted in the Middle Ages, often considered the predecessor to William Shakespeare's Hamlet, and his later work, Macbeth, arguably his greatest and my personal favorite play, further expands the themes such as the flaw of human nature, pride, and fate. Hamlet, in particular, still continues to be adapted in the likes of Roger Allers's and Robert Minkoff's The Lion King, or Robert Eggers's The Northman. which further solidifies the idea that self-destruction is often congruent to human nature, further popularized by the subgenre of revenge fantasies. Since then, the modern tragedy had some changes, such as switching the trope of noblemen and royalty to the layman and the worker, such as Darren Aronofsky's Requiem for a Dream, following the lives of 4 drug addicts as their vices slowly ruin their aspirations that they originally sought for, only to live them out in their dreams. Taking this to Mouthwashing, it focuses on the Pony Express's Tulpart crew, consisting of Captain Curly, Co-Captain Jimmy, the mechanic Swansea and his apprentice Daisuke, and lastly, the medic Anya. Before the asteroid crash, tensions were already running high as the Pony Express essentially is on the brink of shutting down, leaving the whole crew to be abandoned, with Curly being the only one to really profit from it. However, despite Curly being the captain, the game is heavily dependent on the perspective of Jimmy. To better understand how this has come to be, let's break down the core elements of a tragedy. A common theme for tragedies to undergo is a sense of injustice that ends up as a catalyst for the protagonist's motivations. This trope has since become a defining trait in revenge stories, from the aforementioned Hamlet to John Wick, Dishonored, and Attack on Titan. The importance of injustice stems from the human feeling that a higher authority has failed someone, which would eventually lead them to either defy the law or go on their own path in seeking retribution. In the case of Mouthwashing, injustice is a pertinent theme amongst the crew. One of the defining moments came from a flashback of Curly announcing the end of the Pony Express, as the whole crew gets mad at him since they will all be without a job, all except for Curly. Another form of injustice comes from Jimmy, whose injustice comes in the form of his relationship to Curly. To Jimmy, he feels that Curly is always on top of him, but he feels that he deserves to be the captain, further cementing the irony of when he actually takes Curly's role, only for everything to fall apart for the lack of accountability that he takes. However, the one who faces the greatest injustice is Anya. To her, she sees Jimmy for what he truly is, a narcissist, and had to deal with him till her last minute, arguably making her the most important character. Mouthwashing subverts this trope, as usually the one who has experienced injustice is usually the underdog or the hero, when really the game puts the player under the perspective of the villain, changing the perspective of the protagonist to seek justice to rooting for their downfall. The downfall serves as the turning point within a tragedy, but this often happens before the actual climax and falling action. Contrary to the traditional structure of Western stories, the tragedy can often feel more like a slope of events that go downhill till it reaches rock bottom, often feeling like something avoidable but inevitable due to the flaw of human nature, which is shown early on as the game begins to transcend the player into otherworldly realms, signifying the need for Jimmy to take responsibility. Jimmy's downfall would then be indicated a little before the halfway mark, as him, the acting captain, starts getting aggressive towards his crewmates and particularly Anya, which in turn causes the crew to fall apart. This then gets worse by Jimmy slowly going insane, ultimately leading to his suicide by the end. The death of a maiden is a trope carried traditionally by male protagonists, involving a woman vital to the plot whose death is pivotal to the story. Often, these are love interests or close loved ones, but the difference with Mouthwashing is that it ends up subverting this trope as well. This goes to Anya, not only because she's the only woman in the cast, but because her death serves as an exposure to Jimmy's character. Anya's death in Jimmy's perspective did not cause him major regret or accountability, but instead it highlights his character as a narcissist, who cares not for the suffering of others, but his own self-image of trying to be the hero. For what happens when he opens the door late in the game? Nothing. But even in the flashback of when Anya was already dead, she was blurred out completely. Anya's role as a maiden was not to be the traditional death of a loved one, but to show Jimmy's true character as the monster, made worse when it was revealed that Jimmy ended up raping and impregnating Anya, making her fate the saddest of the crew's deaths. The state of madness is another antiquated trope that still permeates within modern media, though expressed differently. In the Spanish tragedy, the Knight Marshal Don Hieronymo goes mad after realizing the death of his son, Don Horatio, by the hand of the Prince of Portugal, Don Balthazar, and feels that this anger is justified and even a call from God to seek justice. However, in modern tragedies, a good example is Charlie from The Whale, who goes mad from binge eating as an act of self-hatred, only to stop once his madness has subsided. In Mouthwashing, Jimmy's sanity slowly slips, transcending him to different planes of existence outside of the Tulpar. These stages serve as a representation for his actions, such as the graveyard sequence where he gets chased by Swansea, indicating not only their upcoming deaths, but the death of Daisuke, as Swansea realizes that it was Jimmy's fault that Daisuke got gravely injured to the point that he had to mercy kill him. Or the ultrasound sequence, as Jimmy runs away from an abominated Polly, indicating his unwillingness to take care of Anya and their baby. Retribution serves as the ultimate culmination or the conclusion of the story. Often this would result in the wrongdoer getting the final blow and the avenger dying, such as Amleth going to Valhall after killing Fjolnir, or John Wick killing the Marquis, setting him free of the table once more before bleeding out. However, unlike most tragedies, it is hard to determine retribution in Mouthwashing, as everyone except Curly dies, or is it? As the story reaches its climax, it was revealed that the true perpetrator of the Tulpar's crash was Jimmy, who wanted to make him and Curly the heroes of the story. But it was only when he admits to Curly in his husk form that he was wrong and that he can still fix everything, and that was by throwing Curly in a cryopod before committing suicide. This act marks the end of Jimmy, as the final act of the villain experiencing defeat, but this death in Curly's perspective feels like him being locked in his personal hell as he drifts in space, unable to do anything about it. This can be a subversion to the Spanish tragedy, where everyone dies, and Don Andrea gets to witness his perpetrators being punished by the spirit of revenge for all of eternity, where one seeks pleasure in punishment, and the other one harrows in it. The tragedy of the Tulpar is to analyze how the hubris of man will not only result in his downfall, but also the destruction of those around him. The phrase, "take responsibility," is repeated throughout the story, meant to cover both the views of Jimmy and Curly. Curly himself is no perfect man. He enabled Jimmy's behavior just because he knew him for a long time, and this blasé attitude eventually led him to not only overlook him raping Anya, but to leave Jimmy to conduct the ship, leading him to suffer the consequences. Now unable to do anything but watch everyone around him turn against each other and die. Bringing it back to the Spanish tragedy, this can be reminiscent of Don Andrea, as both their deaths have them become spectators in their own story, making Jimmy the equivalent of Don Balthazar. To Jimmy, his pride is his own worst enemy, as the moment he finally gets his promotion, he finds himself incapable of filling the responsibilities of a leader, and lashes out when everyone turns to him for help, especially on Anya. Even when he finally admits his wrongdoings to Curly, he admits nothing wrong about wronging Daisuke, Swansea, or Anya, and instead talks mainly about his actions in the crash. Speaking of Anya, her fate is the saddest for all this time. She has been displayed as a timid woman who couldn't seem to uphold her role properly, and when it was revealed that she was pregnant, the crew's dysfunctionality and Jimmy's presence would eventually lead her to go mad herself and take her life. The eyes carry significant symbolism in Mouthwashing. This can be stemmed from by the old phrase, "the eyes are a window to the soul," and taking a page out of the theory of eyes that the fandom has sprouted. I couldn't find the original source. Each character's vision offers a specific view on Jimmy. For Curly, only his left eye is open and unblinking, representing how the accident is ultimately due to his neglect of Jimmy, leading him to be unable to do anything but spectate the downfall of the Tulpar. For Anya, both of her eyes are open when she died, indicating that she sees Jimmy for what he truly is, which is the opposite for Daisuke, whose eyes were both closed when he got axed by Swansea, and for Swansea, he loses his right eye and, similar to Curly, only sees him in one manner, by being a foolish captain compared to Curly, but unlike Curly, decides to take action in trying to kill him. This is a modernist take on the story, as the narrative is heavily reliant on the perspective of the individual. Without elaborating too much, modernism is an unreliable genre, or as explained by my English teacher, it is the literary equivalent to a painting that isn't explicitly an image, but one that takes on its shape, making it the task of the viewer to determine the true image. Mouthwashing does this by crafting the story around a mystery to determine the cause for the crash, making it all the more harrowing when it's revealed that Jimmy was the perpetrator and the villain all along. This can be similar to Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita, as the narrative betrays the audience when they realize that the main perspective of Humbert has been that of a monster all along. The unreliability of the narration in Mouthwashing is also permeated by the lack of vocal dialogue present in the game, as the only way to determine the tone of each character is by the slight pitch in their dialogue boxes, similar to Toby Fox's Undertale. In conclusion, the tragedy of Mouthwashing is executed in the way of creating an unreliable protagonist, who is slowly revealed to be a narcissist whose ego eventually leads him to not only his downfall, but also of his crew. Each action Jimmy makes only serves as another step into sowing his own destruction, as he fails to uphold the responsibilities laid upon him, whether he faces them or not. Curly also faces his tragedy, for his lack of accountability forces him to simply watch his world burn, as he is rendered unable to fix the wrongdoings he inadvertently set forward, making them two sides of the same coin, further solidified by the phrase, "take responsibility." These events would then serve as the culmination of Curly's fate, as he's frozen in a cryopod, unable to make a difference, as the last survivor of the Tulpar, floating in space for eternity. And so, that concludes my essay for Mouthwashing. I noticed this one is a little shorter than the previous three, but to be fair, I wanted to go and hone in on one aspect of Mouthwashing, as it is a very layered game. I absolutely love this game, and the story was nothing but gut-wrenching while you, the player, sowed the fates of everyone on the Tulpar. Now that that is done, as promised, my next essay will cover how the Metro Trilogy is a biblical epic, by looking through Artyom's journey throughout the trilogy, not only through the scope of the epic genre, but also by seeing Artyom as a biblical character instead of a classical action hero. I'm really looking forward to making this one, as Metro is indeed one of my favorite games of all time. But for now, I say to y'all, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between, and everyone in New Orleans, my name is Cobra, and y'all have yourself a beautiful day.